See it shrinking, following the sun? You do not get that if the sun is 93 million miles away. The entire horizon should fade evenly, just like this supposed shot taken from space of the Earth. You can clearly see the way they depict it. They depict the demarcation between day and night, or light and dark, as a long straight line. And you can see the long straight line moving as one solid piece. That means that the sunset should all fade, the entire horizon should fade evenly. But that's not what we observe, as we will see and as we've seen in the footage so far. The sunlight shrinks and follows the sun over the horizon. So these time-lapse sunsets are definitely the nail in the coffin for heliocentrism. But this particular one here, shot from above the clouds from this observatory, is the final nail in the coffin. Look at how the sun just shrinks and the light shrinks to nothing. That cannot happen, as I showed you in the when the sun illuminates the entire Earth, which it does from 93 million miles away. It has to. You don't get this isolated look at the sunlight trailing the sun. That's only possible with a small sun, close, not very high, illuminating locally. I mean, if this isn't proof to you, then you gotta take the blinders off. Okay, and finally I want to show you some examples of local illumination, or a city in the background. This is from Grand Canyon National Park. You can see Las Vegas is one of them. You can see the stars going down, so you know that's not the sun. That's the glow of Las Vegas, it says. You can see that's local illumination. I'm just making an example showing you here's Tuba City and a little bit of Flagstaff. Now, in this one here, you see two lights. Obviously, we don't have two suns, but these are two cities lit up, and it's just to show it looks just like the sun going over the horizon. That's the point of me showing that. That's local illumination at work. The sun is not 93 million miles away, because if it was, the entire horizon would fade evenly, and the entire horizon would fade at the same time. Not what we see here, which is the small sun cruising over the Earth and the light is following it. Case closed.
And you know this. For years, Neil Armstrong refused to be interviewed. I found that to be one of the strangest things of anything. You would think that the first man on the moon, the national hero that he is, would have talked to everyone about the experience, about the wonder. That didn't happen.
His role model was Lindbergh, and Lindbergh became a very public person and was very much out there with his political views and all that. You'd think that Neil would have at least wanted to be a role model for the next generation. Instead, he became essentially a recluse, a hermit. And on every anniversary, they would wind him up and trot him out in public. The most interesting one was during the Clinton years at the White House on the 25th anniversary, where, do you remember what Armstrong said, the most stunning thing that an astronaut could say, and I think in this milieu get away with it?
Give us the quote.
Well, he said two things. At the start of his speech, he compared himself and the other astronauts to birds, to parrots. And he then made a joke and he said, and parrots don't fly very well. Well, what else do parrots do, George?
They repeat what they're
told.
Plant his foot on the surface of the moon has been a pioneer in many ways. And Mr. Armstrong, in asking you to come to the podium, may I say that millions of Americans have admired you not only for your achievement, but for the quiet dignity with which you have conducted yourself and represented not only our country, but humankind. Ladies and gentlemen, Neil Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, Mr. President, members of Congress, fellow astronauts, ladies and gentlemen. Wilbur Wright once noted that the only bird that could talk was the parrot, and he didn't fly very well. So I'll be brief. This week, America has been recalling the Apollo program and reliving the memories of those times in which so many of us here, colleagues here in the first rows, were immersed. Our old astrogeology mentor, Gene Shoemaker, even called in one of his comets to mark the occasion with spectacular Jovian fireworks. And reminding us once again of the power and consequence of celestial extracurricular activities. Many Americans were part of Apollo, about 1 or 2 in each 1,000 citizens, all across the country. They were asked by their country to do the impossible, to envisage, to design, and to build a method of breaking the bonds of Earth's gravity, and then sally forth and visit another heavenly body. The principal elements, leaving Earth, navigating in space, and descending to a planet unencumbered with runways and traffic controls, would include the major requirements necessary for a spacefaring people. Today, a space shuttle flies overhead with an international crew. A number of countries have international space programs. During the space age, we have increased the knowledge of our universe 1,000-fold. Today we have with us a group of students, among America's best. To you we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered. Breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers. There are places to go beyond belief. These challenges are yours. In many fields, not the least of which is space, because there lies human destiny.
Eager, idealistic faces, riveted on the first man on the moon, talking to them, and he looked at them and he said, "There are wonders beyond belief."
Let's go Delta Scion.
Haven't gotten to 1 minute warning yet. One minute. Delta Psi. Push to 10. Wrong side showing. Prime. Igniter ready light. Pre-cool on. Igniter idle. 20 seconds to launch. Everything checks here.
Your position is good, Joe.
Pump idle. Good pump. Good igniter. Ready to launch now. Good light. Okay.
This is the X-15 research aircraft, designed to investigate the problems of manned flight in a near-space environment. Altitudes up to 50 miles, speeds up to Mach 6. High-speed aerodynamics, aerodynamic heating, Structural design, aircraft stability, and control in space and re-entry. This was the kind of information it was to provide, and provided it did. Here's the story. 57,000 pounds of thrust with a throttle attached. No engine like this had ever existed before, but Thiokol built one for the X-15. Now, what kind of airframe could be designed to carry such an engine?
The X-15 was designed and built to take the stresses encountered at hypersonic speeds, to go to extreme high altitude and to beat the heat, survive the extreme high temperatures that build up on the wing, fuselage, and tail during the re-entry to the Earth's atmosphere. The engineering research contribution we made at North American Aviation to the X-15 project was to take NASA's proposal to build this aircraft and to find out how they could be met.
Harrison Storms. He was in charge of the X-15 program at North American Aviation. The X-15 and its B-52 launch aircraft were ready. North American test pilot Scott Crossfield was ready. Step by step, the X-15 research project had moved to this important event. Now, the first of 3 X-15s was about to begin a series of test flights. The schedule called for an orderly progression of tests. In the first flights, the X-15 would remain attached to the B-52. Then a glide flight would be tried. Only then would powered flight be attempted. This careful program of flight tests, flown by pilot Scott Crossfield, proved the X-15 would do just what its designers hoped she would.
From March 10th, 1959 until late in 1960, when we delivered the 3rd aircraft to the Air Force, I made 14 captive flights, 1 glide flight, and 10 powered flights. It was all pretty much routine. We, North American that is, went up there to check out the aircraft. To check out the systems, to see how she handled and whether or not she'd meet the specs before we turned her over to the Air Force.
The pilot also goes through what is called trouble school, where failure of one or more of the X-15's major systems is simulated. Again, his reaction is monitored. Each pilot gets further practice by making a number of flights in a modified F-104 aircraft. He flies over his upcoming X-15 flight course to establish geographic checkpoints and key altitudes in the landing pattern. The range consists of a master station at Edwards and radar stations at Ely, Nevada, and at Beatty. The flight corridor is 50 miles wide, and it contains a number of dry lake beds where emergency landings can be made. 2 kinds of powered flights are made over the high range. One, a ballistic type, high-altitude run up to and even above 250,000 feet. And 2, a high-speed run made at a lower altitude, usually 60 to 70,000 feet. During his practice flights in the F-104, the pilot must also familiarize himself with the timing and positioning for an X-15 landing at both primary and alternate landing sites. And he makes practice landings, using predetermined settings that can simulate the low lift-drag ratio of the X-15. Nothing is left to chance, in the air or on the ground.
These precautions paid off during the following flight, when the pilot realized he could only get 30% power, and that consequently he would have to make an emergency landing at Mud Lake.
Ready to launch. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
light into the light.
On a hot day, more than 12,000 feet of runway is required to achieve liftoff at 170 to 180 knots. Snugly tucked in the X-15 cockpit, the pilot is no doubt recalling the good old days before wing mounting, when he had to squeeze into the cockpit down through the bomb bay. This maneuver was accompanied by considerable huffing and puffing, and a big sigh of relief when he was finally strapped in the seat. Nothing to do now but sit back, relax, and mentally help the B-52 pilot with his flying. Wing mounting of the X-15 permits the ejection seat to be utilized in an emergency, while the aircraft is still attached to the B-52 shackles. Launch checks continue as the pilot tests the attitude control rocket. The high-altitude control system used when the X-15 is on an altitude flight profile above the usable atmosphere. At extremely high altitudes, the conventional aerodynamic control surfaces are not sufficiently responsive for complete flight control. So attitude control rockets are necessary. Pitch and yaw rockets are located in the nose. Roll rockets are located on each wingtip. The underside of the X-15 is now building up a coating of frost on the outside of the liquid oxygen tank due to the intense cold of the liquid oxygen at a temperature of minus 300 degrees Fahrenheit. The auxiliary power units are now started. Note the exhaust trail going over the horizontal stabilizer. Launch. Light roll-off occurs as the shackles release. The X-15 engine is started, and the aircraft accelerates rapidly, quickly leaving the B-52 far behind. On this flight, the plan called for a buildup of 1,500 pounds per square foot of dynamic pressure before pull-up. Again the launch. Photographed by X-15 camera number 1. Note the rapid acceleration as the aircraft drops away from B-52, and the steep climb-out angle. Speed brakes are extended to permit longer burning time of the engine propellants and provide added aircraft stability during re-entry. Peak altitude of 317,000 feet planned for this flight is now achieved. X-15 camera number 5 shows the pilot's reaction to zero-G state. Camera number 6 shows the control panel and the weightless condition. Note the pages on the pilot's flight checklist. The planned peak altitude accomplished, the aircraft starts on the downhill side of the parabola. As the descent angle increases, the horizon gradually disappears out of the picture. Now the pull-out to level flight, and the horizon once again is seen behind the tail of the aircraft. The pilot banks the X-15 to visually judge for himself the landing site relative to his position. The speed brakes close and the pilot guides the aircraft into an approach pattern for a landing on Rogers Dry Lake.
The X-15 research project has long since achieved its original goals. The aircraft has been flown successfully more than 120 times, and although setting new records wasn't its purpose, it has set a few along the way. Altitude, 67 miles. Speed, Mach 6, 4,104 miles an hour, the highest and fastest a winged aircraft has ever flown. Today, the X-15 moves on to further accomplishment. But now the Thoroughbred has become a workhorse, carrying a heavy payload of instruments, undertaking studies of the near-space environment possible before only with unmanned satellite and rocket-borne probes. There are many people who should share the credit for the continuing success of the X-15 research project. But perhaps they will understand if we seem to focus on those who have actually flown the many research aircraft since the X-1. By saluting these courageous men, we also pay homage to all the others who have helped us move step by step, deeper and deeper, into the unknown outskirts of space.
This guy, basically reached out and says, look, I'm in the military and I might be able to help prove the Earth is not a globe, not a sphere, could be flat, and he's got stuff to back it up. So it is my personal pleasure to introduce an active member of the United States Navy. His name is Robert. He is a NATO Sea Sparrow, and correct me as I'm doing this, NATO Sea Sparrow Surface Missile System Instructor. He's a master training specialist, and he's here, tonight to confirm three things, for this movement. One is, from everything he has observed during the last tour, there is nothing, absolutely no curvature to the Earth that he can determine. Two, there is no Coriolis effect taken into account with the ranged weapon systems he has been working with over the years. Three, the navigation systems currently being used by the United States Navy on the high seas, when you compare them to basic trigonometry, and he'll break it down for you, seem to be completely wrong. And there's many other points besides that, and wow, I'm just blown away that he is here. Robert, are you there with us?
I was in the same crowd as everybody else at one point, where I was kind of, the naysayer, like, oh, let me go ahead and show them all these quote unquote proofs that I have that makes them crazy. And,
so you start as a debunker like everybody else.
Pretty much. I really, I came into it with a really bad attitude, basically going on, the lines of, oh, I already know this, I know because someone told me.
On the seas, that there were certain things that were going on that didn't make sense to you. And I kind of wanted to go through them one by one. The first thing was you were mentioning to me about ships that you tracked in the distance. It's okay.
For anyone that doesn't know, max observable distance, roughly, for the horizon out to sea is about 15 to 18 nautical miles, depending upon humidity and dew point and all of that. I've actually been outside with binoculars, with high-powered telescopic devices. We have access to certain things like that. And as a ship is perceived to be dropping below the quote-unquote horizon, all you got to do is zoom in on it, and all of a sudden, poof, the bottom of the ship where it meets the water is back in observance again. And this doesn't add up, because at 15 nautical miles, there's several feet to be dropped around a curved Earth.
Yeah.
So it just doesn't add up at all. Our fire control radar, we actually use a 2-degree pencil beam. It's a very, very tight beam, so there's very little room for deviation on that, and it's a direct line of sight radar.
Okay.
And we're able to track targets up to 50 nautical miles away, and on a curved Earth, that just doesn't add up.
Followed the Chicago skyline.
I have 60 miles away across Lake Michigan. Yep, they can see the whole city.
There you go. So this is collaborating that, which he's saying he can track targets at 50 miles away, which should be about 1,700 if you round up, 1,700 feet below the horizon. But you're hitting them just fine. Wow.
And we're tracking them just fine, and it just doesn't add up. You can do simple trigonometry on it with elevation angle, and everything works out, and you don't drop the track. You can track it quite a bit of a distance out.
We're talking about line of sight targeting or GPS for the projectile, for the missile.
For the missile, it's line of sight targeting. That's basically, like I said earlier, we track the target with a illuminator, and it's basically just another piece of gear that's tied into ours. And once we lock up on the target, we're line of sight pointing straight at it, because it's a 2-degree pencil beam. It has to be pointing straight at it, because if it's not going to see it. It's not a search radar. It's a fire control radar. If you're supposedly looking at something, 50 nautical miles away around a huge curve, it's just you can't punch through the ocean with RF.
But the point is that the 2-inch beam, you have to have it on there for most of the trip. That thing's
Not
out
most,
there.
all of it, pretty much.
Okay, all the trip, except for the last couple seconds, if that. You can pull it off if you had to.
If you absolutely had to, but you have to understand, if it's not close enough, if you pull it off, the missile will go ballistic on its last update, and it might not hit the target.
Got it. And so if what you're basically saying is this 2-inch beam, which you're painting the target with, is you guys, when you're firing this thing out there, you do not account for curvature. That beam shouldn't be able to reach a target at a certain at whatever the at 50 miles should not be able to hit that target.
Yeah, and this is a perfect thing, and I'm really glad that I was fortunate enough to work on this, because the argument always is, well, we can reach over a curve because we're a search radar and we use atmospherics and bounce off different parts of the atmosphere, and then it comes back down. Okay. Now, see, the problem with that is this can't happen with a 2-degree pencil beam. The angle of this cannot put RF up into an atmosphere and then bounce it back down and then expect to get it back so we can properly track.
It's too precise.
Yeah. It's too precise. It can't do that.
Yeah. Wow.
Last little topic that I wanted to mention about that specifically is some of our search radars boast distances of being able to track stuff like over 200 miles away. So take that into consideration for supposed curvature. This is something to think about. 200
miles, yeah. I haven't even looked at the thing at 200 miles, but that's a massive distance. That's I think that's a full blown mile below the horizon if the world was actually round. Mm-hmm. If I'm not mistaken, which you shouldn't be able to hit it. Should not, unless again what you're talking about, bouncing it off something, which what you're saying it does not do. Let me ask something else, because you and I hadn't really, and again, if you can't talk about that, that's fine. But yeah, you specialize in the Sea Sparrow surface missile system, but you probably have had exposure to all sorts of different weapon systems from the ship point of view, both short range and maybe even a few that are longer range. Do you guys compare notes? I mean, do you kind of see the same sort of thing where everything's consistent? It's not like one system is using curvature and the other system isn't. Nobody's using curvature on anything, as far as you know.
As far as I know, we do not. I'm glad you mentioned that, because other systems, if you want to compare them, the only thing we feed into our systems at all, and it's only on a plane system. We have this piece of equipment, and I'm sure quite a few people are familiar with this, but we use gyros, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And these gyros are powered on our ship, and basically they stay stationary once they're spooled up, and we have to power them up before we get underway.
Yeah.
And this information from this gyro is fed into all of our radar systems and all of our weapon systems, and all they account for is the pitch and roll of our ship. So we can account and send that information to, compensate. Like if our ship takes a huge roll, it compensates our weapon system to aim higher, if need be. And if you look at the coordinate system for that, there's no curvature in that at all. It's just a plain model.
That's great. So basically what he's saying there, folks, in case you've missed anything yet, is that there are no weapon systems currently in the U.S. Navy that are using curvature, or the Coriolis effect. It's something we've suspected for a little while now, but nobody's actually said it.
I was going to ask you, because you were talking about earlier about the optics that you have, from binoculars to, I guess, specialized equipment that only the military has. I was wondering, can you see at a greater distance at night than daytime? And the reason I ask you this is because basically our human eye only sees what's reflected or refracted off of objects, right? Can you basically see further at night, whether it's other ships or other objects?
I'll put it to you this way: on my tour on board that ship, I stood a few different watches. I can't go into detail with what they were. We electronically could see different ships that were like 20, 25, 30 nautical miles away. And I've been outside and I've seen with infrared cameras, where there's no haze, none of that stuff. I've literally seen ships 25, 27 nautical miles away.
Wow. And infrared, that's not something, that's not mirage material there.
I looked out in that distance. I went outside and I could see it, and I was amazed. Not like in the essence of, all of a sudden I thought we were on a flat world, because I didn't think that way at the time.
Yeah.
But I was amazed in the fact that we were always pounded in the head with, the horizon's only 15 to 18 nautical miles, over and over and over again. And that's what we were always force fed.
So it was
it's in our training.
So it was this nagging thing in the back of your head going, wait, I can only see 15 to 18 nautical miles, but I'm seeing a ship at 27.
Yeah.
Almost double, and I can see it, and I'm seeing it with infrared, which means it's actually there. It's not, mirages don't give off big heat signatures It's some little, you were mentioning kind of some inconsistencies with practical math versus how the ship actually gets from point A to point B.
Yes. One of the things that always struck a chord with me looking back on it is how long it actually took us to get to different parts of the world. Meaning, specifically, if the Earth was a globe, we should be able to take, a spherical trajectory to a destination, and that's, anyone that knows anything about, math will know that the hypotenuse is always the shorter distance, and that spherical attribute to it, we should get to a said destination based upon how fast we're going, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And that should play into it, and that should be all that you have to take into consideration. Whenever you look at it, these distances sometimes take much shorter of a time, or sometimes they take a lot longer, depending upon where we're going in the world. There's nothing to account for that, because I can tell you, we know how fast our ship goes, and when we're at a steady cruise speed and nothing's changing it, and we're not stopping for any reason, other than to do boxes out at sea, we do a whole lot of boxes. And sometimes looking back on that, I always wondered why we did that. And a lot of it has to do with, I think, trying to mask how long it actually takes us to get to certain places.
Explain real quick. Sorry, I have to back up. The boxes. Explain that for the layman that's never heard that.
And this is something people can look up to. We basically, depending upon where our area of responsibility is, wherever in the world, we'll just kind of sit in an area and just do boxes out in the sea. Like, we'll just do circles, like over and over and over again.
Wow.
Okay. But you're saying that sometimes you suspect that sometimes when you guys are just going in circles, it's because you want to kind of mask the fact that the destination is going to be off.
Yes, I honestly, looking back on that, that's what I surmise. And, I'm not trying to get into the speculation side of it. I'm trying to bring forth truths.
Sure.
And that is my speculation, I'll be fair. But it makes perfect sense when you actually think about it, because when you look at it and compare it to other evidence like southern hemispherical travel by airplane, stuff like that, like you said, how they just fall off the face of the world pretty much.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
It adds up, If you look at it and you compare facts with facts, it makes perfect sense. There's not a whole lot of room to account for that, because when we're cruising and we got a mission to do, we're cruising. We're not lollygagging around. We're staying full speed.
Yeah.
And based upon the distance, and I've mapped it out before, the east coast of the United States over to the Mediterranean, and it should have took a certain amount of time, and it ended up taking, less time than that. And I'm like, how is that possible? Because we don't go faster than that.
And when you say less time, you mean by days or
by
hours?
Days?
By days.
What?
So you're supposed to be there on Friday and you show up on a Tuesday type of thing?
Well, not that crazy, but
bad.
but bad. It's quite a bit off. And, I've been on deployments before where, we have a max speed and we can't break that speed by limitation. We've gotten there earlier. And I'm like, I've made this trip before going across the pond, the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
And it took us 2 weeks.
Yeah.
As where I've went across it before and it took us a week and 5 days.
Whoa. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Then I think, people would be going, what happened? Is there something wrong with the engines? They'd be checking every piece of equipment in that thing. But that's amazing. Yeah. I don't even know what to make of that yet. Because there's especially with ships, there's a real limitation on speed. It doesn't matter what you put into the engines. You could hook up nitros all you want. It's not going to help you. You were saying that when you're south of the equator, you ran into things that kind of fit in with the models that we've been discussing for the last 6-7 months, which is distances seem to be out of whack when you get, well, on a globe, it's south of the equator, but on a flat map, it's out in the outer ring. Is that something you can you elaborate on that?
It's something that actually makes perfect sense to me, because it actually took longer a lot of times to get to an area whenever we are tracking and, making sure that we're on a proper course to get to a certain area like Costa Rica or Guyana or Suriname or something like that. It took a lot longer to get there than what I thought it was going to, because they said, oh yeah, we go such and such fast. And I'm like, I've looked this up in retrospect, how long it's actually plotted to be. And it should have taken about 3 or 4 days less than what it actually took.
Oh, I got you.
So it was much longer.
Yeah, which is what we've been looking at.
But by the way, Mark, I'm terrible with that equation that everybody talks about.
Which one?
The
curvature?
For calculating the curvature of the Earth. I was trying to explain it to my son today.
It is 8 inches per mile squared. So when you hear that, it sounds wrong. And Sean knows. I'm sorry, Robert knows this one. Crap. Where it is 8 inches times every mile. Every mile times itself. So at mile 2. It's 2 times 2, which is 4, times 8 inches, which is 32 inches. 3 times 3, 3 miles is 3 times 3 is 9 times 8 inches, which is 72 inches.
That's the second mile? The second mile is...
Well, the first mile is nothing. It's just 8 inches.
Okay.
The second mile is 2 times 2 times 8. The third mile is 3 times 3 times 8, 4 times 3.